I managed to partner with a housing association and a couple of charities, and we bought that public house at auction. First was setting up a fashion training and manufacture facility in the largest female prison in the UK, H&P. I was the first social entrepreneur to be employed as a social entrepreneur in residence at First Man.
Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Jay Thakkar Show. Today we have with us my boss, Richard Leighton. He is working at Breadth Center and he looks after the impact, the research impact at the Breadth Center for Entrepreneurship and the University of Liverpool. He is running Entrepreneurs Monthly Meetup across the Liverpool, and he's also working in enterprise education in secondary schools. He's running Kids Interview Entrepreneurs podcast, a brilliant initiative for school children. So thank you so much, Richard, for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me today. It's really nice to be here.
So you've been a social entrepreneur for a very, very long time, and how that, like, first of all, like, what is a social entrepreneur in general? Because what we usually think of a social entrepreneur is like someone who is into charity or that kind of stuff. And when we see that, okay, if something is related to charity or something, then it's usually not profitable as a business model. So what's exactly social entrepreneurship, and like, is it profitable?
Yeah, social entrepreneurship can be profitable. I mean, my hope in the future is that actually you've got the two ends of the spectrum. You've got kind of charity and commercial business, and you've got social entrepreneurship that in effect fits within the middle. And my hope really is in the future, it might be another 50 or 100 years, it's almost that charity and commercial enterprise will merge, and we won't necessarily talk about charitable organizations or social enterprise or commercial entities. It'll be more like all commercial businesses have a social mission, and everyone worries about the type of social impact that it has, that tries to limit the environmental effects that it has as well. So, but I mean, for me, it was quite interesting because I didn't actually realize I was as a social entrepreneur. I think I was about 25. And I was giving a talk at a university that I'd studied at. I got invited to come back and talk about some of the initiatives that I was running. And someone in the audience went, "You're a social entrepreneur, aren't you?" And I was like, "Social what now?" So I jumped on Google and I was like, social entrepreneur. And then suddenly something came up called the School for Social Entrepreneurs. And so I had a little look at that and read about it. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm a social entrepreneur. I know what I am now. Before that, I know it sounds really silly, but if people asked me like, "Oh, what is it that you do?" I'd kind of say, well, I kind of feel like I'm some random like weirdo that likes to like be entrepreneurial, but how do that in a social kind of charitable sort of way. So I didn't actually know there was a term, or I was actually a social entrepreneur until I was 25. And by that stage, I'd been social entrepreneuring for a good probably 7 or 8 years by that point. But on reading about social entrepreneurship and the School for Social Entrepreneurs, I actually didn't come off the page, and I applied to study at the School for Social Entrepreneurs because I was like, oh my gosh, this is who I am. I've never met anybody really like me. So actually there's a school here for people like me. I should go. And I actually applied, and I really fortunately got a bursary to go and study down in London. So I used to kind of go down three days a week, stop with friends, sleep on their sofas, and then I'd kind of go back to Birmingham, and I'd sort of run my social enterprise in the week, but every now and then go down to London. And it was actually really nice and refreshing to be in a room where I kind of felt like you didn't have to explain yourself. Like, why do you want to help people and be entrepreneurial? Shouldn't you be out there trying to maximize profit and things like this? But I think nowadays, which is really great, it's more sort of widely accepted and understood. It's a bit more kind of in the mainstream. I can be out and about whether it's at the Entrepreneurs Monthly Meetup or other events and activities connected to entrepreneurship, and you will come across other people like you, which is great. And I think it will continue to grow. But working in a university, you get to see more young people kind of come through that system. And with each reiteration, I would say that more and more people become more socially and environmentally aware and responsible. So like I said, my hope is that in the future, everything kind of merges. But I guess we'll kind of see what happens.
Yeah, because while I was going through your background a bit, I didn't knew when I started working under you, but then when I found out, I was like, this is something which I can tag along in my CV, that I worked under a man who was the first man in the UK to be employed as entrepreneur in residence. So what's that? What's that, the entrepreneur in residence, and being employed in the title, and what kind of responsibility does it bring in?
Yeah, so technically, yeah, you are right. So, but I was the first social entrepreneur to be employed as a social entrepreneur in residence at First Man. So, I only give myself that title because there was the first person a couple of months before. So the NHS had a social entrepreneur in residence go within that, and there was a lot of press, in the Guardian and other sort of publications. But yeah, she was a female, and so that basically when I got offered a position as a social entrepreneur in residence, I didn't actually apply for the role. I was running my own social enterprise and actually a larger social investment group that comprised of a care and support charity that ran multiple local authority contracted services, so like hostels and shelters for homeless individuals, like move on accommodation for ex-offenders or domestic abuse refugees, like extra care villages. So pretty much any social service that's connected with supported housing, they would run these, and I did a bit of business for them in a pop-up shop that I was running to sell sort of hundreds of local young designers. I literally printed some T-shirts and made some pin badges for them as well, because I didn't only sell young designers. I sold sort of vintage that charitable organisations would supply and sort of printed and created sort of small promotional items. But yeah, I did that work for them, and unbeknown to me, their head office was actually just down the road from me. So I was like, I'll just drop it off on the way home. And then the person who put the order in with me was like, can you just quickly pop in and see the managing director and just say hello? And I said hello. And he was like, do you want to come back next week? When's a good sort of time? And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll sort of pop back. And came back the next week, and I chatted to this individual and told him everything that I'd done as a university student, because that's where my entrepreneurial journey started out. And I didn't want to become an entrepreneur or social entrepreneur. I actually just wanted to get work experience. So I used entrepreneurship as a way to create my own work experience, because I couldn't get any paid work placements or a year in industry, or the sector that I wanted to get that experience in was based down in London. I'm from Birmingham, and I studied in sort of Liverpool. Yeah, so I sat down with the managing director, and after a couple of hours, he was like, "You're going to come and work for me now as a social entrepreneur in residence." And I was like, "This is a job interview." The only reason why at that stage I was running my own social enterprise is because I graduated from university. I was struggling to gain employment, and I thought, well, I've been running lots of social charitable projects whilst I was at university to get experience, because they want volunteers and they're happy to allow me to work for them. I'll continue to do that so that when I'm shortlisted for interview, I've got something to talk to, other than I've just been sitting in my room frantically applying for graduate roles and positions. And unbeknown to me, that actually being socially entrepreneurial would lead to me becoming the first man in Britain to be employed as a social entrepreneur in residence. And in terms of the work, that I've done that role a couple of times, a social entrepreneur in residence, and I've also been an entrepreneur in residence, like my role now within the Brett Centre, for entrepreneurship within the University of Liverpool Management School. But my initial role, and actually other roles I've done have been similar. I mean, entrepreneur or social entrepreneur in residence roles, they've always got a little bit of a nuance depending upon what the organisation actually wants and needs. But this one, they in effect wanted me to work with tenants, service users, and staff. So like I said, they had about 40 care and support schemes initiative with housing and support, and they had about 3,000 social homes, so they had a housing association as well. So they had about 5,000 service users there in total, and they had about 700-800 staff, and I would basically support their staff, their tenants and their service users to design and develop and implement social enterprise initiatives. So an example of this was for a homeless service in Birmingham city centre. We decided to set up a vintage store, which got all the surplus clothing from homeless clothing banks, from different charitable organisations across the city that work in homelessness. We put them in a nice store in a Victorian arcade, and then sold that to raise funds and awareness for homeless services. And that also provided training, work experience and employment opportunities for individuals at risk of homelessness that wanted to go into sort of retail. So that was an example. I helped support tenants, staff and service users set up 9 social enterprises across 3 years, and that's an example of one of them. And that one actually won youth-led social enterprise of the year in England in the National Social Enterprise UK sort of award. So that's what I did for them specifically. But like I said, I've had a couple of other social entrepreneur in residence roles, or a social entrepreneur in residence and an entrepreneur in residence role, and they're always kind of slightly different. But the great thing to me was that I've always kind of been entrepreneurial from a young age, or creative, if you like, and it was nice that some others have recognised my ability to innovate, to be creative, to come up with ideas, but equally actually to practically implement those as well and make a success of them commercially and socially, and are prepared to offer me employment to do that while I build up capital and experience to obviously hopefully one day run my own social initiative or social initiatives full time.
Brilliant. And I mean, then, because now you said that even universities are recognizing the roles of social entrepreneurs, and maybe we would see the requirement of social entrepreneurs increasing in even in corporate world. So if any student who is looking to venture their career into social entrepreneurship, what should they look at, either in terms of developing skill set or in maybe strategizing their employment opportunities? What should a student look for if they want to go into the social entrepreneur venture?
So I suppose if most people are going to go into commercial sectors, and that's obviously sort of larger than the social sector. So in general, there aren't lots of social entrepreneur in residence or entrepreneur in residence roles. Like I said, I've been kind of fortunate and lucky in some instances to develop a career in and around this, but it wasn't necessarily designed that way. But in between doing roles, I have kind of looked at, okay, how could I do this more sustainably? And you obviously have corporate social responsibility roles and sections or departments within large organizations. So I think a definite, a more sustainable approach, if you're quite entrepreneurial, quite socially focused, but quite like business as well, would be to look for corporate social responsibility roles. I've never necessarily kind of worked in that sort of sector. I've obviously heard people say that some organisations are better than others. So some do it more for show and, oh, look, we've got some great volunteering initiatives, or we raise some funds for local charities, or we provide some product or kind of, service for free or at a discount. But obviously there will be some really great commercial organizations out there that heavily invest and take it kind of really seriously. So obviously, if you wanted to go into something like corporate social responsibility, I'd just say do your kind of research and find those types of organizations that are genuinely putting their money sort of where their mouth is. There are other things such as governments bringing in is it the ESGs, environmental and social goals. So again, there's compliance things there if your organisation's over a certain size. So there's going to be opportunities to kind of go within there. I think a lot of that will be more statistical and compliancy rather than entrepreneurial and sort of creative. There are opportunities to go and work for social and charitable organisations, which is what I did probably for my first 10 years outside of university. The only thing that I will say within that is they don't necessarily remunerate you to that brilliant kind of level, which I didn't mind at the time. But then obviously you kind of reach an age where you're kind of like starting to think about yourself a bit more in the future. And especially for me, I was trying to build up capital because there's types of social enterprise initiatives, social initiatives that I look to set up are based around assets. And obviously you need quite a lot of capital to buy and redevelop an asset to create some sort of impact. So I was just kind of wary that, actually, I need to really be helping people but earning more money. And that's why I decided to transition over to the university sector, because I kind of felt like it was a halfway house in between the commercial sector and the social and charitable sector. It sort of fit somewhere in the middle. And so I kind of worked as the head of student and graduate enterprise and entrepreneurship at a university for a number of years, running all their startup programs and sort of startup ready activities as well. I also got a contract to actually set up a social enterprise for a university down in London within a prison, and also manage their fashion education in prisons sort of program. And then I was very fortunate that this role came up in Liverpool whilst I was working as the head of student and graduate entrepreneurship. And I kind of said to myself that I actually wanted to go back more to being an entrepreneur in residence rather than, in effect, being a bit of a glorified like program and activities manager. It was really great to kind of get that experience and run that, but you kind of spending 90% of your time organizing things and only 10% of your time actually engaging with people. So I felt that if I transitioned over to this role and became an entrepreneur in residence more, then I could actually design and develop new initiatives rather than be given programs and activities to kind of manage, although there was some flexibility and freedom in that. And then hopefully, obviously, within this role that I can spend more of my time not organising and arranging things, but actually delivering and having contact with people to pass your skills, experience and expertise on to others, which, is the main reason why I do these types of roles, because it's very painful to set up, whether it's a commercial or a social enterprise. It's constant failing. It's very time consuming and tiring and mentally, emotionally, and physically. So if I can make mistakes in areas and in 2 minutes save someone 2 years, that for me is absolutely brilliant, because I think we need to be doing more to support not just young entrepreneurs, but entrepreneurs in general, because it takes a huge amount of bravery, time, sort of, and effort to get yourself to what in effect is the starting line, but quite often takes such an exorbitant amount of energy and effort to get you there that by the time the gun goes off, you almost fall like flat on your face. So I kind of feel like we need to do more to help people to get to the starting point quicker and easier than we are now, so they have more energy and excitement and drive to actually deliver their sort of product and service itself.
Lovely. So, well, like you said, you went to prison, you work with them. Yeah. So what's that experience of working in prison? Because, I'm not only asking in terms of like as a position you were in terms of managing the program, but also in terms of as an experience, because not a lot of people, even in entrepreneurship, would think of having any sort of engagement with prison. So being a social entrepreneur and and running and managing a program where you need to go to prison and work uh, and work with them. So what was the experience there?
Yeah, I mean, I actually sort of really enjoyed it. So just to give a bit of context, there's a couple of sort of programs or initiative I've worked around within prisons or working with sort of ex-offenders. So the first was setting up a fashion training and manufacture facility in the largest female prison in the UK, H&P, sort of Holloway. That's been knocked down, I believe, now and sort of built on, but the fashion training manufacture facility is being moved to another female prison, H&P, Downview, I believe. It is, and that basically trained female offenders whilst they were in prison to become machinists, offering NV qualifications where they could work on small commercial contracts, and then the last 6 months usually of your sentence you can come out on license, which basically means day release, where you can go out into the community and work or volunteer, and then you come back to the prison to sleep at night. And that's a way to sort of reintegrate people back to society, which I think is a really great sort of initiative. So yeah, you can get the experience, get the qualifications, and actually that part of London, Haringey, there's loads of fashion manufacture still going on around there. There's about 1,500 machinists in the area, but it's quite an ageing industry and population, so about 10% retire. So that worked really well, where female offenders would come straight out of prison and into a role where they're making clothes for ASOS or M&S or higher end brands like Jaeger or Aquascoon or Burberry or somebody like that. Then the other initiative that I did was for that university. I spotted an opportunity. It had on one of its campuses, it had no food or drink service provision. So we set up a social enterprise coffee shop on campus with the largest offending charity in the UK, which just so happened to literally be beside where I was actually living in London. It was just a bit of coincidence and chance that actually their enterprise or social enterprise manager just added me on LinkedIn and just reached out, and I was like, I live 30 seconds away, a bit like sort of my first social entrepreneur residence role, and it just sort of all came together there. But yeah, I actually sort of really enjoy it. I suppose there's a couple of challenges. So at the moment, about half the prisons are run by commercial entities. So like G4S, for example, so large conglomerates that will pretty much run anything and anything that public sector government want them to run and manage. And then half are still managed by the government themselves. So it really depends on kind of the prison and who you're kind of engaged with. Again, it's either public sector or quasi-public sector. So it takes a lot of time, energy and effort to get in. Once you get in, it's great. But again, like we were talking earlier about trying to get the entrepreneur to the starting line as quick as possible, it's almost like in those instances, by the time you're ready to start, you've kind of lost the will to live because you've had to go through all this process. But yeah, there's loads of opportunities there. I always actually found offenders sort of really engaging or ex-offenders because, you know, just imagine if we were all lived through the pandemic, everyone thought, oh, wouldn't it be fantastic and brilliant if I could sit at home and just get paid and watch Netflix and not do a lot. And then after 2 weeks, people realise how boring that actually is. So yeah, a lot of the offenders inside, they want things to do. They want to engage. It's very profitable as well because you don't actually have to pay offenders a lot of money to sort of work for you. But, you know, as long as you're providing them with meaningful work and with the opportunity to gain qualifications and ideally what the heads of reducing reoffending, which is the type of person that you want to approach if you want to work within prisons. Because they ultimately want to see people released going straight into employment and not reoffending. That's their role, to reduce that. But obviously a lot of people come out of prison, they can't get employment because they have a criminal record. They can't get housing because there's another 20, 30,000 people in that city on the social housing register. And most offenders are sort of men, so you're not single and you're not necessarily going to be a high priority for them. So quite often people will be released from prison. They don't have somewhere to live. They can't gain meaningful employment. And, you know, what are you going to kind of do to make a living? You know, are you going to maybe fall back into the ways that got you in that situation in the first place? And sometimes no fault of their own. I can see why they actually go down that road. So ideally, if you can go into a prison environment, run, you know, and there are a number of social enterprises that work really well, from coffee roasters to sort of restaurants, for example, that operate within prisons. There's numerous sort of businesses. There's commercial entities that do it as well. But yeah, you can provide meaningful work, qualifications, and then, like I said, ideally when they're released, if you can then transition and say, well, okay, you can come into full-time employment out here on the outside. The fact that we paid you less while you've been working for us for here for a couple of years, we've got a deposit, we're going to support you into your own accommodation, and we're going to give you that foundation of having somewhere to live and employment. That will mean that you will obviously ultimately reduce their reoffending. You won't completely get rid of it, but I mean, Timpson's is a big commercial business. They cut keys and do the shoes, and some of their business is done within prison. So a lot of the female shoes that need to be sent away in one of the prisons that I worked in get done sort of there. And they've had about 1,000, I think 1,500 people come out of prison and work for Timpson's, and I think out of the 1,500,000, I think only 3 have ever reoffended and sort of gone back. So if things are set up and done in the right way, and quite often, I mean, I've always worked with people from disadvantaged and socially excluded backgrounds, because I've always recognised that actually, you know, I was born into a nice family. I had a mom and a dad. Yes, we didn't have the world, but I never felt like I went without. And I kind of always felt that actually, well, once you get to know someone that's, you know, in a certain situation, whether they're homeless or maybe they're in prison, if you actually get to know them and to empathise with them and realise that, well, actually, if you were born into my family and I was born into yours, the odds were you would be where I am now and I would be where you are now. So it's kind of a bit of luck or unfortunate circumstance that means, you know, or good luck in my instance, why, you know, I'm here and you're sort of there. So I've always tried to, like I said, I wasn't given the world, but I always try and always be grateful for what I have got, and then kind of recognize that there's others out there that don't have that, and actually if I can give back and help and support them, and give them some of the support or, you know, the leg up or the platform that I was kind of given, then yeah, you know, that's kind of only fair and the right thing to do.
Right. And it's also like, I mean, just in terms of what I can understand from what you said, it's more of I mean, it's more of like the social entrepreneurship is very similar to what entrepreneurship in mainstream is, but it's just your cause is different. So for example, like if someone wants to be an entrepreneur in food industry, or someone wants to be an entrepreneur in tech and AI, so it's, I think social entrepreneur is nothing but sort of a similar sector, but you have a more social cause, or maybe your process of working benefits a social cause, or maybe your product benefits a social cause in that sort of sense. So even a lot of community run shops and things like that, even they do come under the umbrella of sort of social entrepreneurship.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was at a community pub this morning that got took over by a community, because, you know, there's a lot of pubs that close and commercially it's no longer viable, but actually the community still want a social space to interact, engage, to put on events and activities, to be the heart of the community still, and sort of people come together. So, I mean, like I said, social entrepreneurship is such a kind of a wide range, from somebody who wants to set up a charity where they're comfortable that they have no real kind of ownership over that initiative or the assets that it uses to deliver its products or services, right through to someone that actually from the outside looking in, people would just say they're purely a commercial sort of entrepreneur. So yeah, there's such a myriad and such a mix from one to the other. I would say that I'm very much at the commercial end of the social side. I would probably never set something up purely from a commercial basis. I mean, maybe looking back, I should have set something up thinking, oh, this is very commercial. This could generate a high amount of profit, and actually I could then reinvest the profit into other social initiatives. But I've always been driven by being able to create social impact first and foremost. But like I said, I think in the future, hopefully the term social entrepreneur will actually more dissipate and disappear. And actually, as more generations come through, all businesses will have some sort of form of social impact or some mission that benefits society. And equally within delivering that, people generally, each generation, become more sustainable, more aware about the environment and other things like that. But what I would always say is, first and foremost, is, providing employment to someone else is the best thing that you can ever do socially. If you can live independently through meaningful work, then that's brilliant. And I suppose the only real difference is, I mean, you could take two commercial, take two commercial entities like coffee shops. One's a pure commercial like Starbucks, so obviously it's going to operate at scale. It's going to, still try and be as ethically as it can by fair trade and things like that, but it's going to maximise its profits for shareholders. Yeah. Whereas the social enterprise equivalent, it's going to, for example, probably take less of a margin on the products or services that it sell, because it's going to want to pass and transfer. Although it might be fair trade, it would probably want to be fairer trade. And then equally, quite often, like with the initiatives that I've set up, you're trying to give opportunities for people from disadvantaged and socially excluded backgrounds. So if Starbucks is training up a young person at university for a part-time role, they're already at a certain level of education, probably got some work experience before. It's not going to take a lot of time, energy and effort to get them up to a standard where they can sell coffee. Whereas obviously if you're maybe working with an ex-offender who's coming out, that's been in and out of jail, hasn't done meaningful employment before, then it's going to take more time, energy and effort and cost for you to train that individual up. So quite often the differences for me between a social enterprise and a commercial enterprise is you're going to be less profitable because it costs more to run the business. You are going to have slightly more of a social impact within that. But then equally, you might generate less income because of the types of people or businesses or community or individuals that you kind of help and support. So you just have to be more wary that it's going to cost you more money to run and probably less money is going to come in, but then you're willing to give up that profitability in return for the additional social impact that that you create. But within some industries, that's obviously becoming harder and harder to do, as things like rents, rates, utilities, the costs of certain products to sell go up. Consumers aren't necessarily willing to pay more for those, understandably, if everything you've buy has gone up by 30%, it's like, well, I'd love a cup of coffee and I'd love that this cup of coffee helps ex-offenders, but it's 50p cheaper in Starbucks. It's like at the moment, 2-3 years ago, I'd happily pay the extra, but now I can't, sort of afford to. So some of my worry is the difficulty moving forward as costs continue to increase in general. That margin of profitability within the social enterprise, like I said, which is less because you've got higher costs and generally less income coming in because they're less scalable businesses, or the social enterprises are run less at scale. So obviously if you have 1,000 Starbucks, there's margins you can make, even if it's just a penny here, penny there, that are going to make a huge amount of difference. Whereas if you've got 2 or 3 social enterprise coffee shops, your 2 or 3 pence here or there across 3 shops isn't really going to make you a lot more sort of profitability. So it's, scale and obviously rising costs and people's ability to give more generously worries me in the future. But I am optimistic because more and more businesses and young people that come through are building in social environmental sort of impact as well. So hopefully it will maybe equalise itself out as we move forward.
Yeah, and also it's like even in commercial corporates, we are seeing nowadays a lot of layoffs are happening. So if commercial corporates are like are looking for more profitability just by cutting the employment, is itself um, a huge sign of that the costs are not sustainable right now, at least.
I think if you're obviously owned by shareholders, and unfortunately, and I get it, if we were investing in the company, we want to see profits go up and each year, and obviously the price of value of its share is dependent on it making more and more money. So sort of margins are pushed and profitability, it is wanting to be maximized to generate you a good return, and so that the stock price keeps on going up and up in each year. So from that side, yeah, it's very difficult and challenging. But actually, I see what can kind of happen in the future. Like, we have a lot of older entrepreneurs. So obviously, I've mentioned Starbucks, and there's other really big, large companies and entities that have public offerings and shareholders, but they're the tip of the iceberg in terms of entrepreneurship in business. So, there's only a very small, you have SMEs, most businesses are small and medium, most of them are actually small. And we have a lot of small enterprises at the moment that are being maybe ran and owned for 20, 30, 40, 50 years by people who are looking to sort of retire now. So I think there's opportunity to create more community-led employment by employee buyouts, if you like. So we have, a generation of, I think they're called boomers, who are going to looking to be selling their businesses now, and they're looking for people to buy them out and take that on. And I've noticed a couple of other prominent entrepreneurs who have pretty good social media following have talked and mentioned about that. Actually, charities or social organisations, or even like groups of employees, should be buying out those successful smaller businesses that operate on the high street or local industrial estates or things like that, and then start to run and operate them themselves, or take the responsibility, or a few of you take the responsibility to run that. And I've got a friend in Birmingham that actually did a management buyout on a company that's fairly substantial. I mean, it's got a 15 million turnover. I think it's got about 50 staff, and him and a couple of other senior leaders in the organisation struck a deal to buy the owner out over a time where they didn't actually need the capital. They're just doing a management buyout. They had to put up some capital up front, so I think they did have to remortgage homes and probably get $500,000 together. But then the other, 3 million that they needed to buy them out, it was just agreed over a 5-year period of time. They would buy them out with the profits that come from the company as well. So I think on the commercial side, it's potentially more difficult, but what I hope to see in the future is more people in general become more entrepreneurial to take over existing businesses from people that want to retire, whether that's workers' co-ops, or they take it on themselves, or social charitable organisations doing that. And so I wouldn't be too worried about lots of people losing their employment, or, financial prospects and things like that, because the majority of those businesses are small and medium. So as long as we as individuals or small groups of people come forward to take on that responsibility and find interesting ways to buy those people out, because it's not very many people have the capital to buy companies. But I think somebody who's going to retire would prefer to sell their business over a period of time than just have to shut it down and think this can't kind of continue.
Right. Do you have any questions for me at the end?
No, not necessarily. Was there anything that I've not talked about that you want me to talk about? Was there anything that you want me to ask?
No, I mean, I wanted to know what social entrepreneurship is, because there's a lot of podcasts and everything is being done on entrepreneurship in general. But social entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship in general is something very I would say it's not being discussed as much, but like the kind of ideas you gave, that there are a lot of businesses which needs good responsible people to continue and sustain.
Yeah.
And if community businesses or social entrepreneurs buy them and run them for social cause, and I think that there's a huge potential still being left out in the market, where you can create a social cause and still run something that's already profitable and has been set up for a long time. So I think these kind of ideas, I think, are I wanted to know.
And it's something that I'm obviously looking at doing myself personally, because the type of social entrepreneurship that I do, I recognize that really wealthy individuals buy assets, in effect, and that asset can be a company or it can be a physical asset, but I like having physical assets and then basically using that for community impact. So I'm looking into, actually, can I buy an old art supplies store on a high street with space above that I could turn into social accommodation and house people there who might be individuals at risk of homelessness, but they're quite artistic and they have like an interest in art, and actually house them and then still run the art store on the ground floor. Or, again, it might be a florist with space above and actually you can house people. Because my frustration around sort of homelessness is that we're just kind of putting people into old Victorian hotels, 60 people, and sort of leaving them there. And there's, actually they need more than just a roof above their head. They need to be inspired. They need to see opportunities to develop their own initiatives or enterprises, or to gain access to training, work experience, employment support. They need to kind of feel buy-in and that people kind of care for them as well. So, I mean, everything that I've said about people getting together and buying kind of commercial businesses out there, but maybe as a community or as employees, or charities and social organizations can actually do that, is something that I am looking to do myself. Because you can not only buy an asset that accommodation can be added to, where you can generate additional income, but you can take on an existing business like a chip shop or a bar or a restaurant. And I suppose the only scary thing for me really within that is a lot of the businesses I've spotted so far, it's like, I've never run a fish and chip shop. So for me, it's like I could run an off license, but obviously off licenses are no longer that profitable. I could run maybe a fashion store, but again, that's all going online. So I'm trying to maybe find a gap or a niche in a space at the moment where I could take on a business that has an asset where it has a front door, like on a high street, but also space above for me to add accommodation and do that myself. So I am trying to practice what I preach. And actually, I've spent 10 years building up a huge amount of capital by working for other people. And then actually, I'm now starting to see and look back and think, actually, this might have been open to me then, as opposed to me spending 10 years building up capital. I could have maybe found a really well-meaning entrepreneur who's got a good business, who wants a legacy, whose children don't want to take it over, but I can work under them, get the experience I need, and then they take that on as more of a social entrepreneurial initiative, and house young people in care, for example, or young carer leavers above the store, train them up, get them into work and other things like that. So
wow, that's a really good idea. I mean, I would love to visit sometime when you open that.
When I get round to doing something like that again. I've obviously done I've done an initiative like that in an unused public house in Birmingham city centre. So there was a pub that basically had a late licence, and it operated really successfully. Unfortunately, they had a bit of disorder, and they lost their late license as a consequence, and it couldn't generate enough of a return just as a day pub because of its location. Most of its money was coming being a bit of an after club that people would go from there from 2 to 6 in the morning, kind of after they'd been to a nightclub. And once they lost their late license, it was uncommercially viable. So I managed to partner with a housing association and a couple of charities, and we bought that public house at auction, and we housed 14 individuals at risk of homelessness on the upper floors. And then we turned the pub space into a social enterprise, coffee shop and activity space. So I have done that before in an asset that got used as something else and then became redundant. But I am interested at the moment of trying to find maybe a business that is running quite successfully, has a decent watermark that maybe is dropped off because the person's getting older and isn't necessarily that great with technology to continue to bring in lots of custom or competitors around them. Their customers are getting taken from them as a result that they're not that tech savvy, and then come in and take on their asset, their business, put the accommodation in above, and then kind of run that, and then obviously buy them out, give them some capital up front, but then buy them out over time a little bit more to free capital up for myself to do that again in another location. But like I said, I'm struggling at the moment with the experience that I've got to think, I could take on a pizza restaurant or I could take on a bar, because I don't have that experience. Although I am kind of looking over the summer to start to learn maybe how food and drink businesses run and operate a bit more, because I think for me it's a confidence thing. That any business that I would take on or set up, I want to know how that business runs and have the practical capabilities myself. Because if you're taking on a load of staff, that's very scary and you don't know how to operationally run it yourself. And those types of businesses are very heavily intensive on your cash flow, so you can very quickly lose a lot of money if you don't get to grips of things, and you don't want to spend 10 years building up a lot of capital just suddenly after 10 weeks that just disappear and dissipate and it be for nothing. So but we'll wait and see what happens anyway.
Sure, that will be really, really interesting to watch. So, what kind of skill set in general an entrepreneurship requires? Because in general, when we hear to any entrepreneurship podcast or we listen to even any entrepreneur, we know that they want, let's say, a technical skill set or a particular skill set which plays a key role in your product or the kind of work you're doing. But in social entrepreneurship, it requires more than just the skill set of the kind of product you have. So, for example, if I'm a tech guy, I want to have a skill set of, let's say, the tech side of the product, or maybe the marketing side of the product. I can co-founder with someone. But for social enterprise, it's not just about developing a product and developing a system that is sustainable for a business, but it's also like you need to integrate a social cause with this. For example, like you work with offenders in prisons, so it's not like just working with anyone, any person who fits a particular role, and you just simply employ them and ask them to work in a certain framework. There are different rules, and there's a different game you need to play when it comes to working with prisoners, or maybe working with a community specifically, because community has their own ideology. Yeah. So from my basic understanding in terms of a social entrepreneur is to also have a people's skill. So, like, what other things as a social entrepreneur in terms of the skills that they need to have just to be able to execute their ideas properly?
Yeah, so I feel in some instances I was quite lucky that I was kind of, whether I was born with it or whether I grew up in an environment that gave me those skills and kind of attributes. But I guess for social entrepreneurship, first and foremost, is what I'd say is, you need to be caring and have sort of empathy, which I grew up in an environment where obviously I got to develop those skills, and I very much took those for granted. I thought, everybody's caring, kind and considerate and empathetic, but actually, sort of through the course and experience of my life, I've realised that's not necessarily always the case. So I would never necessarily viewing being kind, caring and considerate and empathetic as a skill set. But if you want to go into entrepreneurship, if you have that, then being able to relate to others, to empathize with them is really important. I'm also really lucky that I've always been quite creative and artistic and quite innovative, I guess, in the way that I've kind of thought. Like, I think and see the world in a different way, being quite kind of always been allowed to be quite sort of independent and not necessarily have to follow the rules or fit with inside sort of a box. So again, like, a lot of those core skills or values I've very much just taken for granted, and I've quite idealistically thought, oh, well, everyone's kind, caring and considerate and empathetic and quite creative and innovative and, you know, artistic and entrepreneurial. It obviously helps as well to not only to be able to kind of spot gaps and niches, to come up with ideas for new initiatives, products and services, but obviously you need to be able to kind of in some form, shape or another practically implement that and bring that product or service to market. I'd very much say that that's an area I've had to learn. You know, I've had to learn to kind of, you know, sort of be resilient, to really take full accountability and responsibility, you know, for pretty much anything and everything. Like, I always, looking back, I think I've always had an internal locus of control. So I don't necessarily believe that it's external factors that will determine kind of, you know, what I am or am not able or capable to kind of do. So yeah, having accountability and responsibility, internal locus of control, as well as those other things. And then I think in general, the practical skills and applications, like, are things that you can very much learn by actually then just taking something that's quite idealistic within your head and then trying to trial and test that and then actually create an actual social enterprise with something as well. But I mean, what I've had to really kind of learn is around sort of failure, because people look at entrepreneurship or social entrepreneurship, people just see this great initiative that you've set up, this brilliant product or service, and they don't see all the failure behind that. But what I've really struggled with personally, like I said, it's exhausting to get to the start line, and then people just see the success and you're so down and dejected and like that you're just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it's this much effort to kind of sort of get here. And what I've had to learn to do is not take those sorts of things personally. So, you know, I mean, once upon a time, trying to raise investment would take me years and would get me down in the dumps, for example. But now I recognize, look, 90% of people are going to turn me away regardless of who I am or what I'm capable of doing. Like, in my experience, and I think there is some academic sort of literature and research on this. I heard someone talk about this the other day, and they were saying about a 90% general failure rate, that just someone will say no for whatever it is that you're looking or trying to do. In my experience, it is very much kind of like that. So it's like, well, if I want 3 potential investors, because I've been in a position where I only had 1 investor and you bent over a barrel. So you think, well, actually, I need some choice and some potential leverage. So if I want 3 investors or 3 potential partners to go in on this, then I need to talk to 30 people before I find the 10% that will say, okay, we're prepared to partner and do, which is obviously an exorbitant amount of work that, you know, like I said, if you're looking to kind of set up an initiative that works with a housing association, like, for example, in Liverpool, I've had to go out to 25, 30 housing associations to ultimately find a few and then decide on one that you might partner and kind of work with. I've actually decided that actually I might be better off setting up my own housing association as opposed to partner with someone else, kind of with the options potentially sort of available. And again, if you're looking for a couple of people to work with on the ground floor, again, you're actually then looking at, okay, I've got to go out there and talk to 20 different people, have conversations, see who fits and sort of don't. So yeah, I've had to build resilience. I've had to realize that, you know, the majority of rejection isn't kind of personal. You do still take it personally, but I've got a lot better of that, and I've actually had to gamify it almost. It's not about let's go out there and find somebody that wants to work with me. It's almost like I know only 10% will say yes. So if I want 3, let's go out there as quick as possible and get rather than get accepted as quick as possible and get the yeses, get the no's, because if you can get the no's out the way, then the yeses will eventually kind of sort of come. So I've kind of reverse engineered that. But obviously it still weighs on you. And again, in general, if it can be quite sad sometimes that you can feel like setting up a successful social or commercial enterprise can feel very much like it's not because of who you interact and engage with. It's in spite of who you have to interact and engage with, you get that success. Whereas obviously when you first start out, you think, well, I want to be successful because I'm interacting and engaging with other people that want success, that want to see great things. But actually the majority of people aren't creative, aren't entrepreneurial, have an internal locus control. You're only probably looking at 10 to 20% of people who are actually kind of like that. So there's a lot of perseverance and a lot of that you have to go through to kind of get something that is then successful. And then some of the frustrating things then is when you do get the success, success can breed more success, and then more people come forward who initially sort of said no to you, who wouldn't fund you or partner, and then suddenly they want to. Now they can see that you're like a success, they want to then be associated with you. And I'm kind of like, I needed you to associate with me when I needed that association and support. Like I already knew that this was going to be success. It's unfortunate that you didn't see that, but I don't necessarily need you now, or need someone who's only going to associate themselves with me because
you're successful.
I'm successful. And it's like, you should have known by my track record, by my interaction, engagement with you anyway, that I could clearly make this a success sort of anyway. So just anyone who wants to go into entrepreneurship or social entrepreneurship, develop especially social entrepreneurship, develop being kind, caring and considerate, empathetic. One thing I will say as a caveat there is like, have good boundaries, because there are people unfortunately out there that are prepared to try and take advantage of, control and manipulate people who are kind, caring and considerate. So you kind of need to recognize that it's good to be those things, but equally you need good boundaries. You need to be able to say no and recognize when someone isn't a good actor necessarily like you. And I've made a fair few mistakes sort of in that area over time, and then suddenly realize we're not on the actual sort of same page. And then and develop your resilience, your perseverance, taking accountability and responsibility, learning to deal with sort of rejection. And then there are other skill sets that need to be developed as well, but unfortunately or fortunately, I've tended to operate within a sector around social housing and homelessness. So, for example, I'd be saying you really need to market and promote your product or service really well. But the fact is, in Liverpool and in Birmingham, Birmingham is about 30,000 people on the social housing register. So it's about 3% of the population. And in Liverpool, it's about 20,000 people on the social housing register, which is about 5% of the population. So the reality is, some of the skills and attributes and experience you might need around some areas of running a successful business, in homelessness, I've not needed that, because if you create a scheme and you're prepared to house and support people in terms of accommodation and access or on-site access to training, work experience and employment support, I've always been inundated, so I've not necessarily needed to go out there to promote that. I have recognised, looking back on my time as a social entrepreneur, one of the things that I should have done better was market and promote myself and what I'm doing and my ability to make things happen, which I've always been reluctant to, because, if you're quite kind, caring and considerate, empathetic, kind of self-promoting, being a little bit more narcissistic, if you like. I know that word is thrown around quite a bit, but it's not necessarily in your nature. You don't want to sort of show off. But actually, I've realized that if I'm telling people about what I'm doing, if people see my face, hear about what I've achieved or what I'm trying to do in the future, then somebody might be consuming some content up in Scotland or in Wales or Northern Ireland that reaches out to me with an opportunity saying, oh, we're a housing association in Belfast and we've come across your really interesting model that you've developed, redeveloping an unused pub to house and train people at risk of homelessness in. Like, we'd love something like that. Come and see us, rather than me knocking on 50 housing associations' doors and them all, saying no, or 90% of them saying no. I've kind of realised that looking back, I should have made more time to maybe document and promote and talk about what I'm doing more, because more opportunities would have come to me rather than me having to try and fight and find those opportunities to create more impact and scale.
At the end of the day, we have to sell ourselves. It's how the world works in general.
I'm learning that now. Yeah, I mean, once upon a time, I did kind of believe more in about if you're doing a good job at work or you're creating impact in a society, people will sort of talk about you and your integrity and how well you've done, you've been successful. But I'm kind of realizing that actually that doesn't necessarily happen. You get word of mouth if you have a store, you're selling product or service, but if you are your product or service, it's very rare that someone's going to be sat in some meeting in London and they've met you once upon a time and think, who is that person that actually, and then connects you. That has happened, but yeah, you are right. I think it's more important than ever now to actually develop more of a personal brand in order for you to be able to create more commercial or social sort of impact. And I think I'm becoming more comfortable with doing that, because I realise that if I do that, I can create more social impact. It's not about me being narcissistic or showing off or anything else. It's actually about me just being interesting and talking about what I'm doing, and someone else thinking that could add value in the community that we're operating in. Let's partner or collaborate and see if we can do something together.
Yeah, 100%. So how did you like the podcast, and do you have any questions for me at the end?
No, I enjoyed being on the podcast. It was really great. It's not like I said before, it's not often that I've actually done things like this. So in terms of being interviewed and recorded, in terms of having the visual as well as this is the first official podcast that I've ever done, which can seem a bit strange, being as I've probably been socially entrepreneurial for getting on for 25 years. I guess now I started off as a teenager when I was in college. So so it's been fun. It's a good experience to think, okay, I can kind of do this. Maybe I'll do some more in the future. Maybe I'll capture sort of my own content as well. In terms of questions for you, I obviously kind of know a bit about your sort of background. I didn't necessarily know so much about the physics side until the other day, and you mentioned that you were in physics, and then suddenly I was like, but you're studying philosophy. So that was quite an interesting sort of juxtaposition. I don't know whether you just got fed up or bored of one subject with a P and you just moved on to alphabetically the next one. There might be something else in between, but I don't necessarily sort of view entrepreneurship as like a philosophy or something, but I don't know if you've done any research or reading in and around sort of entrepreneurship or creativity or people wanting to be innovative or to take ultimate or maximum accountability and responsibility for their lives and want to create impact, to maybe leave a legacy for themselves, like on a philosophical level. That's always one of the most hardest words I can kind of say. On a philosophical sort of level, why does somebody decide to kind of go down that path and that route and potentially carve themselves out a space in history that they might not even kind of know about because of what they've done, over somebody who's just maybe more content with thinking, well, maybe that entrepreneurialism or creativity or innovation thing isn't necessarily something for me, and I'm more content and happy with having, I guess, what others would deem a more normal existence of, going into education, going into work, having a family, retiring, and maybe your legacy is the fact that you've continued, your family sort of line and things like that. So, from a philosophy point of view, can you offer me any insights into why entrepreneurs exist, why highly driven people go out there and do what they do, as opposed to what the majority of people do, which isn't that.
Yeah, I mean, what I think, I mean, I haven't done any philosophical readings or research on that topic, but from what I can personally observe, is that a lot of people have some virtues in their life which they've developed during their childhood. It majorly depends on what kind of socio-economical situations they've been brought up in, what kind of friends and what kind of environment they've been around. So I mean, usually if you see any person coming from a very polarized area, very polarized community, you would often see them going into one or the other extremes, because they've come from an area where they don't see any gray area. They would only see black and white, and for them it's normal to be in either black or either white side of an argument. So it's similar to that, but I would go a step more, and like you said, talking about legacy and all these things. I think, other than leaving a legacy, I think what an individual thinks about what they find virtuous is what drives them, regardless of them being into an entrepreneurial journey or not. Because, like you said, you are an entrepreneur, but you are still and you are still employed by the university. So you are not a businessman or an entrepreneur in that context, but you are entrepreneurial. So I mean, even in my experience, touchwood, I have been around really, really great people. Like, I mean, from what I've heard, people having very uh, like having crack-headed bosses and all kind of things. But like, even when I was in India, I was working with the company. I had brilliant leaders around me. My manager Akash Jose, and one of the leader of our team, Rudraksh Joshi. These two people really helped me and trained me in actually understanding what, like, my mindset was usually on, okay, this is the thing, maybe we can do it this way or that way. But I would always see, like, okay, this is what we have. What if we have, what if we have a level 2 of it, then we can do all these things. So I was always more in the dreamland. So these people, when I was doing my first job, these people kind of helped me understand that you can still be entrepreneurial with what you have. You might not need to have a lot of things to start off with, and then it kind of gave me that sort of skill set. And even they were employed in a company. So I think entrepreneurial being entrepreneurial, or entrepreneurship as a skill set, is very much inherent, based on what kind of background you have, and how you've been brought up to look things. Because when I came here, I was not sure if what to do and what not to do. I emailed my student support, Amy. Shout out to Amy. She got me in touch with you, and now I'm working, but I don't feel like working. I feel like, I mean, I don't even, I'll be very honest, I don't even feel like I'm working under you. I feel like I'm being mentored by a big brother. So it's more of like, what kind of community you are surrounded with, what kind of people you've been grown up, that creates a lot of impact in even how you think and perceive things. If we have that kind of virtue, then it's easier for us to develop the entrepreneurial skill. And when we develop that skill, it's easier to express it in any form. Like, we might not have economic capital based on where we are or based on our socioeconomic positions, but the entrepreneurial skill set will always be there. And I think that's much more required nowadays to add value in whichever field one goes in. So I think that's my own personal take. From what I understand.
No, I think I resonate with a lot of that. I mean, probably the last 5 years, I've had to kind of, sort of reflect more upon myself. And certainly in the last couple of years, because I also teach on undergraduate and postgraduate modules here, and one of the undergraduate modules we have to do, it's called the Get To test for entrepreneurship, and it gives you a score across different areas. And I have literally 100% on a need for achievement, and I was like, oh my gosh, why am I that driven? Where does that actually come from? And I've consumed more content around entrepreneurship and learning to try and get better and become more successful and improve for a number of years now. And I kind of noticed that on some of the content they actually talk about, well, quite often people are negatively driven from certain aspects that happened in their life, especially kind of in areas like sort of childhood. So I've had to kind of sort of dig deep and look at things and reasons why I am the way that I am, but try and reframe or remodel that in a way where actually I want to be more positively driven, whereas a lot of successful people are actually negatively sort of driven as well. So I definitely sort of resonate with that sort of perspective. And quite often I thought, well, maybe I'm really driven and want to succeed and take accountability and responsibility myself as a result of that. But then actually looking back at like childhood, for example, you can see certain experiences actually. I was in a position where I had to take accountability and responsibility, even though I wasn't accountable and responsible, because that's just the way that things were in that, in those instances. And equally that actually, maybe that I'm, sort of driven because you had people that negatively influenced you when you were growing up, and actually you achieving and be successful is a way for you to say to them and to yourself ultimately, look, I'm not this bad person that someone says they are. I mean, maybe, I thought one of the big reasons why I've gone into social entrepreneurship is because if you do have people that when you're growing up saying that you're the problem, you're the issue, you're not a nice person, you're not good, you're not this, that and the other, when actually looking back, that's actually just a projection that was just bestowed upon you from that other individual who was just trying to use you as an emotional conduit to hold their shame. Suddenly you hold that shame for them, for yourself, thinking that's who you are. And so I do lots of nice social things to help and support others as a way to prove to them, to myself, that I'm not this bad or nasty, horrible, bad person that I was told that I was sort of growing up. But like I said, I'm trying to find a way to sort of reframe that now, because you want to be driven in the right way. And ultimately, if I wasn't driven like that, maybe I would just be more of a straightforward commercial entrepreneur. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just for some instance or some reasons I've sort of focused more on social entrepreneurship. And I don't know whether that's because of it's a negative driver, whether it's something I'm particularly interested in or what. I think I am genuinely interested in that because I feel like I'm very good at spotting certain social challenges and issues and developing sustainable commercial social solutions for that in a very efficient and effective way. So, whether I was pushed into that area negatively, it's still a positive thing that I found that. But then equally, when I've looked at maybe I focus on commercial, that's still never sort of driven me. So I think it's interesting. I've just personally always just wanted to leave the world a better place than when I came in and when I sort of found it. and just help and support others. And again, maybe I've done that looking back, growing up. Maybe I try and help and support other people because I felt, although I did have a nice upbringing and background, but obviously anyone who does this certain aspects and negative individuals in and around you, that I've kind of always tried to help and support others because I've maybe felt there's certain aspects of my life I've not had that help and support, and it's almost like a projection of me thinking, well, if I help and support others, they'll help and support me. But I felt that at some times, but I still feel that's sort of lacking. So I think there's still a lot of work for me to do personally, and a lot of people who are successful, who are entrepreneurial, who are really driven need to kind of do. But I don't necessarily think there's one certain piece of content or information someone consume, or one particular pill, or eating healthy or exercising or doing or some form of improvement here or there that will ultimately get you there. I think it's a process of working through that and just learning to become a better person sort of every day and become more accepting of maybe who you are and what you do. So yeah,
thank you so much for doing this podcast.
Brilliant. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.